Let's have a conversation about some of my thoughts on watching, true crime documentaries and stories and I want to talk a little bit, talk about true crime a little bit differently about stuff that comes across as disingenuous or fake to me or very scripted and rehearsed. Hi, my name is Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed therapist. And as someone who's been on quite a few true crime documentaries and podcasts now, I thought I would give some of my thoughts on some of the things that I've seen on true crime that just really strikes me as odd or stands out as like, that seems a little fake to me. And I see this on quite a few, so it's not just one or two. But the first one, and I don't know that I've ever heard anybody talk about this, but the first one is with the detective that's usually telling the story. First of all, almost all the detectives are some older white guy, which, that in itself is questionable to me. Um, that almost all of them that I see. But this first thing is like that I see that it's so odd and that just doesn't sort of jive with the detective. It's like when a detective, this is the worst crime scene I've ever seen. Almost every single detective has that rhetoric. But the second piece of rhetoric that I've seen detectives have, which is yeah, is that they're always sort of crying about it and how, like they're crying tears or they're coming close to tears about how this case was so tough and it was so hard and it stuck with them and yada, yada, yada. And they're just sort of a blubbering mess. And the reason why this sticks out to me, I don't know how many of you out there have worked with police officers, homicide detectives, and whatnot, but that group of people is not one that's like sensitive or cries like that. In fact, their humor is very dark. They're very crass. They're very curt and cutthroat. It's a cutthroat group of people. They're very stoic. They're not friendly little sensitive teddy bears, essentially, is what I'm trying to communicate to you. And so to see them like break out into tears over some case that they connected with in almost every single true crime documentary, it strikes me as very odd, disingenuous, and rehearsed. It's almost like they all have that same narrative verbatim, like where they're all telling it all the same. And now they all of a sudden are overwhelmed with these feelings. It's like they see lights, camera, action, and then they begin to act a little bit. Number three, you know, every woman that's getting killed has a smile that lights up the room. She's a joy to be around. She's this wonderful, angelic human being. Again, that narrative seems to be something that's repeated across all genres of true crime. Having worked behind the scenes on true crime, I know a little bit about why they do this, and it's to avoid, being perceived as being disrespectful to the victim, being sued, all that kind of stuff. But again, that narrative becomes very monotonous and it comes across as very disingenuous. What about that girl that nobody likes or that people were getting into it with at work? I think it's good to kind of paint more of a realistic narrative of victims without, you could sort of paint that narrative without being disrespectful about it, as opposed to saying that she was this magical, mythical creature that floated into a room and everyone just turned around and fainted from awe. And I think number four, one of the things that I've also noticed that is very interesting that never gets talked about is bias or prejudice within a police department. Also, just complete bungling of cases where they overlook something, the police work is sloppy, or someone didn't follow up on certain things. Those things are kind of swept under the rug and not really flushed out about in a lot of cases. Those things are also very real sometimes. And in fact, that's received a lot more attention in recent years with the exponential blowing up of social media. There's been quite a few cases that have been solved via social media, and one of them, one of the documentaries I actually worked on, in that it was solved by social media before it was solved by the police department. So literally, people who are keyboard sleuths are solving crimes that they're not even laying eyes on paperwork and stuff like that for from around the country. Another thing that really gets glossed over is like families of victims and how they've been impacted. Now, this is coming out a lot more and more, but I still think that there's sort of a glossing over or like more of a positive spin on how families of victims are doing or how they react to some of the things that come out. So, for example, a lot of times you may see, like, oh, I had a hard time, or we split up after that and we kind of went our ways. And it was kind of like that versus like there have been, like for example, mothers of victims who have had a complete nervous breakdown, went homeless, lost everything just because they shut down and stopped functioning. I'm not really sure why there isn't more of a realistic portrayal of how people are affected. And or maybe it could have just been stuff that I've seen that hasn't been put out there. But just from what I've seen, there isn't a realistic portrayal. In fact, they may actually avoid interviewing that person that had um, a tough time. And I understand why they do that now, having been on the other side of it, because sometimes people just cannot make it through those interviews. And I've been in interviews where people just had a complete breakdown in the interview, and it just we've had to stop due to their inability to recover. And I understand that. But I think, again, just having sort of a narrative that says, hey, they're not okay. They had a difficult time. Victims are usually portrayed from like families of victims are usually portrayed as like making sort of a recovery, a lot of them in terms of starting an organization. But I don't think there's enough airtime for people who don't ever come back from that. And the reason why I say that is because that's real life. And when people are struggling mentally on the other side of that, a lot of people go for what they know on TV. And one of the things that people see on TV is everybody seems to bounce back when that's not actually true. There's people that spend years in like purgatory, just sort of wandering, breaking down, using drugs, self medicating, losing everything, and they never bounce. Lastly, more recently, what I've noticed in recent years is that they're taking out children more and more, so that you guys are only getting part of the stories in true crime. And true crime in general, just when they tell stories, are definitely glossed over and they're making it appropriate for television. But if there's ever a child, usually that's a part of what's happened, like a child was killed or something like that, what I'm noticing more and more is they're leaving that out. And there's a move towards eliminating stories about how children were also harmed in the process of this. Even for older stories and documentaries, they're actually removing the aspect where children were actually harmed. And lastly, one of the things that I will mention is that true crime very seldom touches on. I mean, there might be one here or there sparingly, but it very seldom touches on true crime committed by service members. So men and women who are police, who are military, who are firefighters, and things like that. And those crimes, that gives the illusion that those types of things never happen when they're actually quite common. And the statistics around that kind of stuff is also sort of left out from the general public as well, so that it gives that impression that this is a well functioning or high functioning group, when in all actuality, there's a high rate of violence within those groups of people.